You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with Conservative commentator Tim Montgomery and Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. It's panic at the pumps. The Mail leads on the long queues at some petrol stations, despite ministers' pleas for calm. Transport chaos spreads, reports The Times, with IT problems at airport passport gates also causing delays at transport hubs. The Mirror quotes a retail chief warning the government has just 10 days to save Christmas, with a winter of discontent looming amid supply shortages. PM relaxes rules for foreign HGV drivers is on the front of the Telegraph, with Boris Johnson set to relax immigration rules to tackle the crisis. That's also the lead story for The Express, which says the Prime Minister has lost his patience. The Guardian also goes with that story. The Financial Times has a similar headline, reporting that 5,000 food processing workers will also be given temporary visas, in addition to the HGV drivers. And The Star takes a humorous view of long queues at the petrol stations with the headline, Grumpy Pumpy. Only The Star. We're joined tonight by Conservative commentator Tim Montgomery and Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Mail and their headline. It's panic at the pumps. For once, I have to say, I'm not sure that this is overwritten. On my drive into work this evening, I passed probably 5 petrol stations and the queues stretched outside to the road. Is it time to panic, Susie?
Well, we shouldn't be panicking because there isn't a shortage. But I've got a similar thing. I live in a small village. There's an independent petrol station with a total of 2 pumps in it. And the village Facebook group tonight is alight with fury because the entire centre of the village is utterly gridlocked by people queuing up for a petrol, and there's scores being settled all over the place. The Mail reports there that police are being called to some petrol stations, mercifully not my one. And this is what happens when Grant Shapps goes on television and tells people not to panic. They do the opposite of what he says. The man is the kiss of death to a decent public relations message. He should be only wheeled out in times of absolute pandemonium. I mean, wouldn't notice him anyway.
Tim, follow that. I mean, I suppose it doesn't help when you have one of the petrol suppliers, their forecourts, they're limiting and they're rationing petrol to £30, a maximum that people can buy, apart from the emergency services and HGV drivers. So that then does feed into the panic, doesn't it?
It does, and I don't think any of your viewers, Gillian, need reminding. Of course, you know, there was all the toilet roll hoarding at the start of the COVID crisis. We do collectively lose the plot sometimes when we get these stories. And don't panic, Captain Mannering. You know, it's all part of the English lexicon, really. But the government will be very, very worried about this. I'm old enough to remember I was a Conservative during the heyday of Blair years. There was nothing we could do during that period when William Hague was leader to connect with the British public. But we did, as Conservative opposition, go briefly ahead in the opinion polls. And that was during the fuel strike that some of your viewers may remember. And that was when there was trouble getting petrol to the pumps. And it created a huge panic across the country, bigger in scale than we've seen at the moment on this occasion. But people were frightened, not just, of course, for their ability to fill up their own cars, but, of course, we know we live in an economy which is incredibly tightly run. And if petrol stops arriving in the way that it normally does, that has implications for hospitals, for the food we get in our supermarkets. And so I think the government needs to act incredibly quickly in response to what we're seeing today, because otherwise, you know, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where people panic buying in quantities that they don't need at the moment can create the kind of crisis that we all want to avoid. And I think that's why measures like capping people's ability to buy petrol at £30 a time are being introduced. But you know, it just potentially means that people visit petrol station down the road to get another £30. So even that isn't really a solution.
Meanwhile, Susie, the Mirror is setting deadlines, 10 days to save Christmas. This is according to one retail chief that's saying unless new drivers are found in the next 10 days, we will see significant disruption before Christmas.
Yeah, and this isn't really a new or recent thing because, you know, in 2019, the government warned in the House of Lords that there was going to be a driver shortage with hauliers at some point in the near future. 3 months ago, I had a quick look this afternoon, 3 months ago, the retail industry wrote to the Prime Minister and said, we're going to have issues at Christmas with deliveries. We need to get this fixed now. 2 months ago, it was reported the government was looking into perhaps letting HGV drivers get visas to come over from Europe, and that went nowhere. 4 weeks ago, the haulage industry wrote a open letter to the Prime Minister, screaming blue murder that exactly this was going to happen. And in fact, if someone sent me it today, 5 years ago, in 2016, back when I'm an amazing Minister Grayling was in charge of the Department of Transport, they published a report talking about all the structural problems within the HGV, within the haulage industry, the problems with using cheap foreign labour and agency staff, the fact they could not retain staff. So there was a constant churn and there was a constant reduction in the number of HGV drivers available. They have known about this for at least 5 years, if not longer. Brexit has been the straw that broke the camel's back on all of it because it means we don't have foreign drivers coming in from elsewhere to pick up some of the slack. It's harder for them to come in, and we're not getting the same work when we send our hauliers abroad. So this was always on the cards. It's always coming down the line, and this has happened now. Boris Johnson is saying today, or letting it be known, letting it be briefed out, it's on some of the front pages, that he will allow 5,000 emergency visas to be given for HGV drivers. That's dandy. Except we're 90,000 drivers short, and issuing a visa does not make an HGV driver turn up like that. It takes weeks or months to recruit and train and move people and bring them across borders. And in the meantime, as the Mirror's reporting there, if we don't get this fixed in 10 days, which is impossible, Christmas is kaput.
Tim, forgive the pun, but this does seem to have been coming down the road for an awfully long time. This is a massive U-turn, this easing of visas for truck drivers, isn't it?
It's a massive U-turn and it isn't. I have a lot of sympathy, actually, with what Susie has just said. You know, 10,000 visas isn't going to solve the fundamental problem. Sorry, Susie?
5,000.
5,000, yes, 5,000 for HGV, yes, 5,000 for poultry workers. So, yes, it isn't going to solve the fundamental problem that the country faces at the moment. I think we're much more likely to see progress. I think lots of HGV companies are trying to get, you know, retired or part-time drivers to work full-time, to come, you know, back to the forefront of this challenge. I think there is a problem with tests. You know, one of the main reasons I think we're in this situation. I accept that Brexit is a contributory factor as a Brexit supporter, but the main reason, let's be absolutely clear, is the fact that we've had COVID and lots of people who would have otherwise qualified as HGV drivers in Britain haven't been able to qualify. We need to fast track those tests to get people onto the road as soon as possible. And overall, I would have some sympathy with the government's reluctance to introduce extra visas for people overseas, because that is how the haulage industry over time has kept the wages of drivers low. The government's general desire not to bring in foreign workers has been to protect the wages of British workers and give them a better deal. So it's a reluctance that a lot of people will have sympathy with, I think.
Yes, and Susie, we read in the FT that basically the Prime Minister has had his arm bent on this and he's bowed to months of pressure. This is not something that he wanted to do.
No, and it's a similar thing, to lockdown. It's something being done late because he's been made to do it, and therefore it's too late and it's not going to work. If you've got to do it, and if you've got to do something that ideologically or personally you don't fancy, rip the plaster off, do it early, make sure it actually works. If you have to do this thing, don't leave it till the nth minute. If people had paid more attention to what Boris Johnson's career was like as a journalist, all you'd have had to do was speak to the sub-editor who had to have his columns delivered late and with a skid mark right across the page, and which held up everybody else on the paper trying to get their own lives and things organised and causing costs and delays for everybody else. If you can just see someone who is a journalist, right, as a columnist, one of the most useless people on the planet, and I am one, if they're acting that badly and with that sort of disrespect for the way the whole machinery and everything else works around them, how on earth are you going to put them in charge of running an actual country?
We need a tally. Grant Shapps, Chris Grayling, Boris Johnson, they've all sort of been blamed by Susie for this crisis. Let's be clear, there may be some blame to be allocated. But look across Europe. There are HGV driver shortages across the whole of the continent. Poland, I think, has 100,000 drivers short. This is a problem that is complicated and not amenable to sort of easy, simple solutions. Christmas will not be kaput, despite Scrooge Susie's warnings. There will be some extra prices that all of us, unfortunately, will have to pay. It's one of the reasons why I don't think the government should be cutting universal credit at this time, but that's another story. But, we will have Christmas. There'll just be, unfortunately, some extra niggles associated with it. And after what the world economy has just been through because of the COVID crisis, if people expected smooth sailing in every walk of life, then they were fooling themselves. We've just been through one of the most dramatic episodes in our history, and there are bound to be complications, and the shortage of HGV drivers is one of the most significant manifestations of that so far.
Susie's shaking her head, but Tim, you got the last word there just before the break. A thumbs up. Do stay with us.
It's Tim.
Go on then, you have the last word. So what was that?
Oh, Gillian.
Drivers across shortages across Europe, but nowhere else in Europe, not in Ireland, not in Poland, Tim, has empty shelves or petrol shortages. That's just here, where just one thing's...
That really is the last word for now. That really is the last word for now. Stay with us. We're going to take a break. Coming up, as the Labour conference starts, the Deputy Leader shares her views on fixing the social care crisis. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview with me, the Conservative commentator Tim Montgomery, and Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface. Welcome back to you both. Let's have a look at the Mirror now. And this is the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner. We read in the previous papers 10 days to save Christmas, but she's saying it would take 20 days to save social care would there be a Labour government. Tim.
Yeah, this is the beginning, of course, of a very important Labour conference for Keir Starmer, and I think there will be quite a lot of people looking at Angela Rayner as the possible alternative leader if Keir Starmer fails. They have a notoriously testy relationship, and Angela Rayner is obviously making a pitch which is really central to British politics at the moment. It wasn't so long ago that Boris Johnson put forward his pledge to deal with the crisis in social care. There's a story elsewhere in tomorrow's paper in the Times with local government leaders already saying that the money that he's pledged won't be enough to sort out the crisis. They're talking about potentially a 9% increase in council tax in order just to plug the funding gap in social care. And so here we have Labour's deputy leader putting forward her own ideas. And of course, we would all support the higher wages for care home workers that she is advocating in this interview that would come through a compulsory form of wage negotiation. I'm not entirely clear how she will pay for it, but that's a common problem with most Labour policies.
Susie, she's got some credibility in this space, though, hasn't she? Because she's a former agency care worker.
Yeah, she does know what she's talking about, which makes a pleasant change from so many people who are in the government who are working in something that's not their specialism, shall we say. And what she's saying, I read that headline about 20 days to fix social care, and my jaw hit the floor, and I thought, what? That's going to take a lot longer than that, love. But actually what she's talking about is that within the first 20 days, she would push through some legislation which would make it mandatory that employers and workers would negotiate their pay. And so she says that she sees that's a win-win for bosses and for staff. Everyone gets a work-life balance, everyone gets better pay and conditions, and they get happier staff as a result, and they get more productive staff as a result. So it seems perfectly sensible and reasonable. Elsewhere in that piece, she's talking about, it's a big interview, it's quite wide-ranging, and she's talking about how she wants to go for the top job and get to Downing Street. And it sounds as well like she very much wants to take Boris Johnson on one-to-one. And the two of them are very similar in some ways. They're both sort of unspinnable, and they're not happy to do what other people would advise them to do, in terms of doing what their press officers might say. So, she's not Keir Starmer, let's put it that way.
No, she is not. Very quickly, we've just got time to talk about Emma Raducanu playing with royalty today, Tim. Very quickly. Yeah.
A lovely photograph on the front page of the Telegraph. But, of course, I think it was 2 weeks ago we were celebrating a huge win, and she's already axed her coach. And maybe that's what you need to stay at the top of sport, that kind of ruthlessness. But it's a big gamble by a very young player. Good luck to her, though, is all I can say.
Susie?
I don't like the use of the word ruthless. All tennis players, when they break through, tend to change their coaching team. Just had a look when Andy Murray split from Ivan Lendl. That was ending his partnership. When he split with Aurélie Mauresmo, that was dumping her.
Susie and Tim, we have run out of time. Thank you so much, both. We'll see you in the next hour.